However you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls of the universe and beyond, to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Tonight's going to be a fun night. We are covering all things ET, well, quite literally, whether it be Mars or ancient aliens. And we'll start off tonight with our first guest, Dr. Rita Louise. And in the second hour, we'll have Marc D'Antonio of SkyTour Radio on KGRA, who many of you are familiar with. It is so nice to be back. Man, when I do a week without doing this show, it just feels like something's missing. You know, a little piece of my soul is empty when I'm not doing this show every week. So I'm so happy to be back with you guys. I know this month we've missed a couple of shows, I guess, in the past month and a half, really. And I know a lot of you are struggling in Texas, where Dr. Rita Louise is tonight, and in other parts of the country that have been hit with snow and weather. We got hit pretty good in New York, but fortunately here in the city, we are doing quite well. We have heat, we have electricity, we have running water. So very grateful for that. And I hope that any of you that are out there in Texas or beyond are doing okay, and that you're safe and warm inside. I was having a conversation with Ken Cherry. Many of you know from Epic Voyages Radio. He's a good friend, and he had lost his electricity. He's in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and a pipe burst. So he went without for a few days, and he was telling me he's very, very lucky to have a fireplace and a stove, wrought iron stove, I guess it was, that he could heat his food on. You know, and that's living off the grid, and I love that idea. And that's a subject that I'll probably come back to in the future. Last year, shortly after the pandemic happened, we did talk about, survival and being prepared. In our own personal life, that's something that we consider a lot as well, as, how to make best and how to prepare, and, where is best for us to be. So these are all questions that, it just, we're constantly reminded, whether it's a pandemic or natural occurrences, or just life situations, whether it be job, employment, and what have you. So all of you out there, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're safe. And let's get to it. I'm going to bring on one of my favorite guests, and someone who has also been a past guest host, and she's filled in for me on several occasions, I think, is Dr. Rita Louise. Rita, welcome back to Paranormal Now.
Here with you, with power and heat, and because I survived the snowpocalypse of 2021.
Snowpocalypse, yes. It felt more like a snowpocalypse because, at least here in New York, it'd been so long since we had an actual snowstorm or snow in general. Last year, I think in total we had maybe 2 inches of snow.
Well, here, so I used to live in the Dallas area, and so they actually had ice or salt and sand that they would put on the overpasses because they would freeze, in rainy, cold weather. But where I live now, they didn't even salt the streets. They didn't sand the streets. So, and I live right off a major thoroughfare, and the snow never melted. People didn't drive on it. It was just kind of interesting. But today, so we went from 11 degrees to, it was 50 something degrees today. And, you just had like a sweater on and went outside versus 15 layers and hoodie and, bundled up because it's Arctic weather.
Right. Well, how much, because you hear different things in the news. I mean, how much was it unpreparedness, or was it just, Texas is just not used to this kind of weather, and did they have no reason to be prepared for this? So
I've lived in Texas since 1994, and I would say that there is snow maybe, and I'm not, maybe once a year, and it's about 2 inches of snow. 1 year there was a really bad ice storm. That was really bad. I mean, it just coated the streets with an inch thick of ice. So that took a while just for it to melt. But usually it's like it'll snow, and then the next day, 2 days later, it's done, And so there are areas around here that had almost a foot of snow, which is unheard of, plus 7 days of sub-freezing weather where it just didn't melt is abnormal. for this
Yeah.
area. Really abnormal.
Well, I'm glad that you're okay. And speaking of abnormal, you are the author of Stepping Out of Eden, the E.T. Chronicles, and a really interesting book, The Dysfunctional Dance of the Empath and Narcissist. So a little bit off topic from what you normally work on. And your work has covered a wide breadth of subjects. And we are talking about later in the second hour, the Mars rover Perseverance, Ingenuity, the rotocopter that's going to be flying around on Mars, which is super cool. And it is the search for life. But do you believe that we actually already have evidence for, if not proof, for extraterrestrial life, correct?
Well, I mean, with my work, what I really look at is what happened in the mythic record. And, so I'm not really a contemporary ufology person, although you can look at what's going on today and then compare it to stories or, subjective evidence from the past. And there are parallels between how people describe things currently and how our ancestors who didn't know anything, they didn't know what a lighter was. They didn't have the technology we have today, how they described it. And so the technology, their descriptions of the technology actually do hold up with contemporary machinery.
Yeah. Is there one shining example that stands out for you?
Well, there's the whole concept of like the Vimanas, the Indian flying ships, and it was interesting because they talked about that there were like 5 or 7 Vimanas, so we have this impression that there were hundreds of them, all these gods were flying all around, but there were really a finite number of them. And so you find stories of people flying on clouds. You find stories of dragons, people flying on a dragon or a cloud. And then kind of parallel to that, and I like using the Indian cosmology because there's always a story tied to it. It's not this 2 little line narrative. In the Mahabharata, they talk about these things, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly because I have no phonics skills. And they were called sabas. And they were the homes of the gods, and there were 5 of them. And so the smallest one was like 300 miles by 500 miles, and they had cities in them and gardens, and hundreds of thousands of people lived in these sabas. But if you go and listen to Greek mythology, you have the land of the gods where they had, Zeus was in a golden tower, and as you move down, they moved into silver and into bronze. And there were these giant epic places like Mount Olympus was this grand place that where the gods lived. But it was clearly not on Earth. It was described as being beyond the sky and further than where you could reach the birds. So it was out there. And then it just makes me think of the Death Destroyers on Star Wars. I mean, those things are huge.
Yes.
Huge.
I think what's interesting about what you said is that campfire stories passed down through millennia were stories, right? And they're usually morality tales or what have you. But to go out of your way to actually, mathematically, describe the dimensions of a craft, that's not just, to me, that seems far more detailed than just a story that's to teach you a lesson. That seems like it's a record keeping to me.
It really does seem like record keeping to me as well. And they use series of mnemonics. They would have a little image or a symbol, and that symbol was a reflection of what the story was. So we can sit here and, if I presented you, and I probably can give a verbal, I'll just do the verbal and see if you can figure out what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But if I describe a image where there are 12 men sitting at a table eating dinner, they all have long hair and they got these kind of flowy robes on.
Sure. The Last Supper. Yeah.
Okay, so that was painted, 500 years ago, but the event was 2,000 years ago. But we still know the story. And we don't know the people that were there. And we know what the context was of that narrative. But that narrative is 2,000 years old, and it's been held concretely as a narrative. And over the years, it really hasn't changed.
Right. Well, in the Bible, not everything is measured out, but the ark certainly is. There are dimensions described there. And so, is that just our imaginations needing to make something more concrete, and we make up these dimensions? I mean, or are they just symbolic, or is there an ark of the covenant out there somewhere to be found?
Well, and that's a really interesting question. No one's asked me that one before about the ark thing. Because the flood story is the most common mythical narrative we have on the planet. Sure. Mm-hmm. There's that story, and then how humanity got fire. Those are the two most consistent stories we find. But not all of those stories talk about them building an ark, and there definitely were no dimensions. Some people climbed to the top of a tree, or some people climbed to the top of a mountain, or they might have gotten on a leaf, and escaped the flood. But the little individual nuggets and the way that the story is shared is very consistent through all the stories. There's a man and a woman, maybe a man and an old lady, and they escape they're warned of the flood. They're always a pious person. They're warned of the flood. They climb the tree, get on the leaf, build an ark, build a boat, dig a canoe, climb to the top of the mountain. Some of the stories have animals. Some of them don't. Some of them talk about releasing an animal, whether it's a bird or not. And in my research, what I found the most interesting was that you would think, so in the Middle East, they talk about Noah and the ark and the animals and all these very specific elements. And then you go to other cultures around there and the story changes, but pieces are kind of dropped off. But then you come into the Americas and now they have animals again, or the bird might get released. And so I think there was a bigger story. Now, whether the Noah story is, the one and true only story, or we have to kind of look at it, and that's it. So the amount of time that they spent in the Bible writing the story is pretty much the amount of time and narrative you get from most of these other cultures about that flood. Yeah. Which says to me that it was something. Something happened.
Was this a period of high technology?
I don't get that impression. I don't get that impression. I mean, obviously, they must have had at least some kind of technology to build a boat, but boat building has been around. I don't know when it started because obviously there's not any physical evidence of boats that were potentially constructed 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, because they would have decomposed by now. But our knowledge of boat technology is ancient. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they even speculated that Homo erectus utilized boats of some sort to travel from Africa to, India and make their way around.
Island hopping, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I know recently there was a discovery of, I think, either 2.4, I think it was 4.4 million year old potential hominid, the earliest known ancestor of humans. So, we're constantly pushing back our understanding of our own past, our own origin story. And so those things tend to go in parallels. It's like, first you find the bones, right? And then we find that, we were around much longer. And then we find some artifacts or something that says, they were much more intelligent than we realized. So, these stories that might be interpreted by ETs, I sometimes just wonder if it was actually us and, we had kind of evolved and then destroyed ourselves or just slowly, de-evolved as a civilization and then rebuilt back up again. What makes you think it's more ET related?
So when you read the narratives, there are, I like to call them early myths, and then late myths. And so anything that you find basically before the flood narrative, I consider early myth. And then anything after the flood, I consider later myths. And so before the flood, it's the stories of the gods. And, they're flying around and they're doing all their stuff and fighting with each other. And that's where you hear the magnificent weapons and all the things that they did. And the stories are told from you and I are talking about something. There's an equality, like I'm part of the gang or you're part of the gang, and we're like saying, hey, on Friday night we went and did this, and we crashed this party and did all this stuff. But once you pass the flood, two different things happen. One, the commonality of the stories change, and so it goes from stories that you find all around the world, which is really what the ET Chronicles looks at, is that group of myths, to stories that are more regional and more cultural. And so you don't find this consistent storyline that you find prior to that. But the viewpoint of the stories change. The viewpoint changes from hey, me and you are going out and partying, to, oh, Alan, maybe you'll let me come and hang out and party with you. And so humanity is now looking up to these gods, and they're not part of the gang. And so, one part of me speculates that perhaps the stories we have of the gods that come from that early period, they were taught to us, just like we were taught stories about Santa Claus, just like we were taught stories about the Last Supper. And that's why they're very consistent, is because if I'm telling the story of the Last Supper, I'm going to say it pretty much the same way over and over and over again.
Well, Rita, we can party together anytime, and I'm cool with it. Yeah. So what do you think about the Mars rover and our own search here in our own solar system?
Well, I think it's really interesting, and there's part of me that wonders. I mean, there's just been there's the mainstream stuff, and then there's the alternative people that that is a little far for me to wrap my mind around. That have been talking about that we've had this Mars program that's been going on for years, and this isn't anything new. And I'm like, well, maybe we'll see evidence of that. But. Yeah. One of the things that I wrote about in ET Chronicles was about these different worlds. And, and they were basically changes of power that happened throughout time. The Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Copper Age. But there are cultures that actually have 5 cycles of time, and they start out with a cycle that discusses this dark or semi-dark world where the progenitors came, and there was a disaster there, and it came to an end. And so while I was doing the research, I was like, let's go look at Mars. It's got that face there. Mm-hmm. And timeline-wise, it fit the timeline. There was a natural disaster. They lost their magnetic core, and so scientists believe that about 4.3 billion years ago, Mars was lined up to have an atmosphere. It was moving forward in that direction. And then they had the late bombardment period where a bunch of asteroids came and knocked it around really bad. And so it lost its magnetic core, which meant that it lost its atmosphere. And timeline-wise, that's when this group rebelled and took off to create the Golden Age. And so I was like, well, that's really kind of interesting. Zero proof,
sure.
Other than my speculation. But with the timeline, I thought it was as good a guess as any.
Yeah.
How's that?
No, I think it is. And I think that's why people in your field and what we talk about on the show, I think we should be allowed a little more forgiveness for our speculation. And as I was saying to you earlier, I had just finished Extraterrestrial by Avi Loeb, the Harvard professor. And while he doesn't entertain what we entertain, he does make the argument that the scientific community is far too conservative and protective. What I thought was really interesting is spent a lot of time describing how scientists are protective of their work, of the process, because they have this, and I don't think he meant it in the worst way possible, but he said it, this sort of elitism where they feel like they have to not release any information of their studies until they have a final figure, right? A final conclusion, because they don't want to confuse the people. And he's saying, well, no, you're actually making it worse, because you want to invite people along the process, especially considering the study for all things out in outer space. Majority of it comes from public funding, and they owe it to the public to to share their progress and their mistakes, because when you're so protective, then that's when people become suspicious of what you're doing, and distrusting. And that you want to have a better relationship in that process. And I'm really glad that he said that. And he's also really pushing for scientists to search for extraterrestrial life out there and to use every methodology possible. Like Oumuamua came, the alleged comet or asteroid. He makes an amazingly convincing argument that it's not a comet and it's not an asteroid. That in all likelihood, the simplest explanation is it was engineered. And I love how he turned the Occam's razor argument against scientists who often use that against what you do, what I do. Because they say, the simplest conclusion is that it's not ET. And he's saying, actually, in this case, here's the data. Statistically, it's nearly impossible to not be manufactured.
When you look at myth, though, even with the Bible, if you go through the Bible and every time it says God, you put extraterrestrial in there, the book, it makes way more sense. You look at myth, and if you put extraterrestrial in there, it would make more sense. And I love what you're saying. I'm just going to put in my hope in it, is that if they do and start putting out their research, that they frame it as research, they frame it as their speculation, or this is what they think, and don't come out with it as this is what it is and this is the new dogma. And because you see that so much, you see that like in the battle between Darwinism and the theory of evolution, and the way that whole thing came forward. When I was working on the Stepping Out of Eden book, and I know we're going to break, so I'll talk really fast. Okay. I was sitting there looking at the actual evidence they had of evolution, and they had like a piece of a leg bone, a piece of a jaw from different sites, and they came up with these huge conclusions about them. And I'm like, dude, you came up with this whole theory about man walking upright, and you had a piece of leg about this big. Seriously? That's all you got?
And then they're coming after us saying, y'all crazy. So anyway, we'll continue the conversation on the other side of this first break with Dr. Rita Louise. Thank you so much, Rita, for coming on tonight. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for hanging out with us. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. Stand by. We'll be right back on the flip side.
Tell me why, with 12 sides, the odds are that we die, roll the die, as too high, I can't find you on the other side of the line.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your grateful host, and taking us out of the break was music by Septembrio. If you want to find out about Septembrio and their music, go to Septembrio, spelled with a Y.com. And of course, every week we have something to share, and that this week would be my request for you to go to the Paranormal Pop page on YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com/paranormalpop, please go there, support the page, follow, like, and what have you. I'm working on more content to come, and originally I wanted to get to 500 subscribers last summer, but a lot of things were put on hold. So hopefully by this summer we'll hit at least 500 subscribers on the Paranormal Pop YouTube page. So I really appreciate any support you can give me there. And we're going to bring Rita back to the program. Rita, what's the greatest mystery for you? What is the most wondrous, or what's the biggest question mark for you?
Oh, God. See, you should have prepared me with that question in advance. So I could think about it a second. Chocolate or vanilla? No.
I'm going vanilla right now. I'm feeling vanilla.
I'm more of a chocolate kind of gal, but yeah. It just seems like, actually, I'm going to go here. So yesterday I did an interview for Ancient Origins, and we talked about the ritual experience. And so where I left the interview was, what was the takeaway? And so in ancient and indigenous cultures, the way that they communicated with the gods was through ritual. They would prepare for a week, fasting, cleansing, preparing food, because this was a community event, where the clan would get together, or multiple clans would get together. But there was this very intrinsic, and I'm going to use the metaphysical word tied to it, because everything they did was this meditative act. They would grind paints, they would make masks, they would make food, they would prepare and sanctify the space. They would ritually cleanse themselves, in preparation to have this celebration happen where people were taken into an ecstatic trance. And it seems like today we have really lost that connection with source, that connection with the world. And I'm sure you've heard people tell stories of Aboriginal Australians where they talk to the animals and they say, oh, well, go this way because it'll get you to where you want to go. Or, Bob says, hey, come over for a beer because, the grasshopper told me. But I believe that people that participated in those cultures had a deeper connection to the world around them, the animals around them, were more in tune to their intuition and their inner energy. But we're not there now. And it seems like everything we're doing is moving us into a totally opposite direction. And there are some people that say, well, this is just part of our ascension process. And that's really a big question that I have. It's like, is this movement into, thinking all the time and being in front of the computer and not really being in harmony with the earth and with each other bad? Is it bad?
I think it kind of is. I mean, there's so much that's good and positive about what we're doing right now, for instance. In the electronic world, it's great. But I remember, and I'm sure you remember too, there was a time where if you were talking on your cell phone in a restaurant, that was bad form. And people looked at you, people got angry at you, they thought it was rude. And now it's just completely different. And the reason is because you weren't, I don't know if people, verbalized it that way, but they weren't present. They weren't, you're not present in the moment if you're constantly distracted. And I'm guilty as anyone else. But I know that, my wife and I, we crave more nature. We do. And I wonder if that's because we're exposed more to electronics now than ever. The counterbalance for that is you need more airtime. You need more greenery and lakes and rivers and sand, whatever.
Exactly. What we see in the world is just so much anxiety inside of people. And I feel like that comes from because we have our heads stuck in the computer, or we have the TV on, or we don't utilize opportunities to, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, let go of energy. So when you meditate, you let go of energy and you feel more at peace and more whole with yourself. When you go for a walk in nature, it's like when you're done, you feel more at peace and more whole with yourself. When you exercise, you feel more at peace and more whole with yourself. So there are these things that you can do, but we're choosing not to do any of them, or a lot of people are choosing not to do it. And then, there's what we eat, which doesn't help anything either, and so I can understand why there's more and more tension on the planet and more fighting going on. I mean, obviously there's not wars going on, but all you have to do is go on Facebook and write something that someone else doesn't like, and that anger just jumps right up and smacks you in the face.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's crazy. And our ancient ancestors didn't have to deal with that. I mean, they probably couldn't even conceive of that. I'm the same with Facebook. I spend much less time. I mean, much less time than I used to. I started working at that, reducing my time on Facebook, about 6 months ago, just really. And little by little, I've been getting better and not spending too much time there. Like I'll pop in, maybe I'll post something, maybe I'll, check out a few posts, and then I'm out. Like I'm very strict with myself and disciplined with how I deal with it. And I do feel better because of that. And I don't know if you've seen in the news, and I'm a Star Wars fan. People here on the show know that. And
Star Trek?
Oh no, I love Star Trek too. But I don't have a CBS All Access, so I'm totally behind with what's going on with the latest Star Trek. But with Star Wars, Gina Carano, was fired off of the Mandalorian film. And I went and I read her tweets, and I was like, okay, maybe not the best taste or the best choice of framing how you were trying to. But her message was a wholesome message. It was like, don't judge others. Be kind to the person. She's a person with heart, and yet she lost her job and was torn down. Even if I disagree with her on a lot of things, she was totally mistreated and what I would consider bullied. And that's that world, that online world, that social world could be very toxic all over the place. It can be toxic. And so I'm less and less inclined to hang out there.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. I mean, some of the most hateful and vile things can come across your screen. Yeah. And then there's the part where it's like, well, you get concerned about what you post, and exposing yourself, to condemnation from people, and I have, and I'm sure you would agree. It's kind of like, you have people that have friended you on both sides of the aisle with whatever's going on. And so it's kind of like you say one thing and you get slammed. You say something else, you get slammed. And so it's like, well, maybe I just won't say anything at all. Or, oh, well, if you support this person, I'm going to unfriend you because you totally suck. And it's just like, seriously?
Yeah. I don't.
Like, wait, you used to know me. We were friends, and now you're acting like I'm like this evil person because I don't have your opinion. Mm-hmm. Maybe I don't want to be your friend. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand people can be concerned about other people's opinion being "quote unquote" dangerous, right? But that's like a whole other type of conversation. But in general, I think that we should be comfortable in our skin, with what we believe in. But at the same time, I'm with you. I mean, do I really need to go online and share all of my opinions? No, I don't. And I actually feel much better that I don't as much as I used to. I feel lighter. My head's clearer. Because when I posted things that were really impassioned too often, I found myself constantly checking because I would get notifications, right? The people are commenting on your thing. So it just keeps pulling you back in and pulling you back in. And I'd rather spend my time using technology, doing something like this. This is fun. This is cool. I love this. We're actually having a conversation, which is what people don't have anymore.
Exactly. But it's really not limited to Facebook. I've had my show, so there's a lot of episodes of Just Energy Radio on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And then there's some videos that I've created, and I created one about Rama's Bridge. And so some guy wrote on there, well, why are you calling it Adam's Bridge? Blah, 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 blah. That's not the real name. Blah, blah, blah. You know, and it's just like slamming me. And I'm like, but the title of the thing is Rama's Bridge, 175, thousand-year-old mystery.
Mm-hmm.
But in it, I call it Adam's Bridge because people call it Adam's Bridge also.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're not in India, And so it's like...
What is Adam's Bridge to you? What is that?
So there is a land mass that goes between mainland India and Sri Lanka. And so, tracking with me?
Yep.
And and it kind of like, it's just kind of like goes along. Mm-hmm. And so in the Ramayana, which is the story of Rama, he has to go and conquer the demon god Lanka, who lives on the Isle of Lanka. And so I talk about that in both books, actually, because it's such, to me, an important story. And so he gets a hold of these Vanara. Okay, and so the Vanara are these half men, quote unquote, half apes. Okay, and they were created, and you're going to love this story, because Vishnu, their supreme god, told all the gods and goddesses to go down to the earth and impregnate the apes and bears. And so their offspring were these half men, half apes, except if your parentage was a god, you had special powers. And so if your god was the head of air, then you had the ability to jump really far. And like one of the other characters, his father was a chief architect, or two characters. And so they helped Rama because they couldn't get the forces from India to the Isle of Lanka. So these Vanara create a land bridge from India to Sri Lanka.
Okay.
And so what Rama's Bridge is this landmass that connects India to Sri Lanka. And they've done excavations, and what they found is on the bottom are all these giant boulders, but when they went underneath the boulders, instead of them being attached to the earth, there was actually sand and silt underneath. So it gave the impression that it was actually a constructed edifice, which supports the story that comes out of the Ramayana. Okay, no sound. No. Ooh, maybe I get to take over Alan's show. Hey. Okay, well, I'll just keep talking. And so after they construct this bridge, they beat Rama and go back to where they came from. But what I found was really interesting is the parallel story that we find with that is from the Bible, where it talks about the Nephilim and the sons of God mated with the daughters of men. One of my big things is to find parallel narratives. And so there is the biblical story, and I never was able to find a parallel narrative until I found that one in the Ramayana, except in the Ramayana, God told them to go down and create this army. And so it was a divine event, where in the Bible, it was a very toward event, but the net result were these hybrid, half men, half God people who were the men of renown.
Right. And do you think that these people actually had superpowers?
So what I believe, and that I talk about, again, speculation on my part, but timeline, it works. It's all about that timeline. Is I think that intermixing was actually what created Homo erectus.
Interesting.
Because prior to that, we had early tool use, we walked upright, so there was the beginnings of humanity. But then when Homo erectus comes onto the scene, we lost our body hair, we were forming societies, we could talk. it was Homo erectus that developed fire. So there were a lot of things that moved us from being an animal. Our brain increased in size. We were much more social. And so we weren't animal anymore. We were much more what we would consider human in who we were.
Right.
Timeline wise, Rama existed at the end of the Treta Yuga, which was from like 2 million BC to like 80,000 BC. And so if you put it, or 800,000 BC. So if you put it in the timeline, because these Vimana had to be created, that again fits in the timeline with Homo erectus. Because 1.5 million years ago, 1.2 million years ago was well within that Treta Yuga window.
That's really fascinating. Now, do you think that there's a chance that we'll have more evidence of that to be found in the future?
Well, I think that, my personal belief is that, humanity was genetically engineered. And so was this a story about genetic engineering? Is this how they made the genetic engineering happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was an inbreeding that happened?
I want to thank you for hanging in there while I had some audio issue, Rita. And Marco said, "Over, Rita, you're awesome." Thanks, Marco.
He's my buddy.
If you go to Paranormal Now, if you look on Spreaker, you can find the past episode that Rita did an interview as a guest host on Paranormal Now with Nick Redfern, which was also a great interview. And that's a great opportunity to share the website, soulhealer.com. I'll post it again in the comment section. So you've had experience for a long time, doing talk radio and talking to all kinds of different people. Is there a field of study you haven't touched on yet that you're considering or would like to work in?
Okay, another hard question. Well, right now I'm really working on this whole relationship thing and,
Sure.
The empath and narcissist thing, which has really been keeping me busy, in just a very different way, really looking at the dynamics between people. And then also I've been taking some classes to, because I already do the medical intuition work and the psychic reading work and the energy work, but I'm not like a trauma recovery person, like I can sit there and tell you all the messed up stuff that's going on with you.
Yeah.
But, I don't necessarily have the tools to help you transition. And so that's kind of one of the things I've been working on is, how as part of my personal practice, help people transition, because apparently people have really been resonating with this new piece of work. And
do you think that people are more narcissistic in modern society than they were thousands of years ago? Is it a modern problem, or is it something that's always been around? And if so, is it something that is learned from the environment, or is it genetic?
I think that, narcissism has always been around. I think that there are some people that are just, more egoly driven than other people. Mm-hmm. But I feel like in the contemporary day and age, we're teaching our children to be narcissists. With the whole No Child Left Behind, you can't have scores in baseball. How can you not have a score in baseball?
I don't know. You just hit balls and run. I'm not sure.
I don't know. But they don't want it where
I've never heard that.
Yeah, my boyfriend does umpiring, and so I don't know if it's just to like a certain age, to like 13 or something, but they don't want them to win or lose because everybody goes home with a trophy. Well, you don't learn what failure is like, and you don't learn to step up your game if that's what you want to do. I mean, you just don't learn consequences for anything. And so you end up with a bunch of kids that now they have to go to work and they're not going to be queen for a day every day. And their opinion when you're 19 at your first job is not going to change the direction that the company is heading in just because you had that opinion. And they can't handle it. They can't handle being told no. And that you have to work for more than 3 weeks to like maybe get a promotion.
So it's a generational instant gratification kind of thing, you're saying?
Correct.
I see.
But they're being taught that. I mean, they're being taught that in schools.
So I guess my question is, living closer to nature, does that help solve some of these types of behavioral issues at all, or does it not matter? Is it really just the people that are around you and how they raise you? Because in my mind, I always think the closer you are to nature, the more time you spend in nature, the better I feel, the more balanced I feel in general. But that's me. It doesn't necessarily apply to everyone.
But also tied in with that is, kids are attached to their phones or their, tablets or whatever. And so ripping one of them out of their hands and making them go in nature, like, I don't know how old you are, but when my kids were growing up, I would say, okay, now it's time to go outside and play. And they would sit on the stoop. And they're like, well, we don't know what to do. And I'm like, go play, go find your friends and go ride your bikes and go be fruitful and multiply. Or maybe not that. It was 2 boys. But, and they would end up going to their friend's house and getting on the, playing computer games.
Yeah.
So I think they don't even understand like how you can go outside and take a stick and have fun or, kick through the leaves or.
Well, also, your imagination is developed that way. And, the things that we talk about on here are cultivated by imagination. Even if it's science or just everyday living, that's something that's extraordinarily important. And it can be liberating for mind to learn how to do that instead of rely on devices and software and games to constantly fill that for you. And speaking of imagination, I was reading this book again by Avi Loeb, and there was a question posed that I thought was really fascinating. And he leads into the question with, let's look back at the conquistadors coming to South America and how they, ravaged, the Mayan Empire and Padre so-and-so, I forget his name, burnt all the manuscripts except for, 1 or 2 survived. 4 that survived. Okay. And then he says, so imagine extraterrestrials coming here. What would you prefer? Religious extraterrestrials or secular?
Well, I guess it depends on what their religion is, because if they were like religious Klingons, they would be like, oh, it's a good day to die. It's like, no.
But then he follows up with another question. Well, there's plenty of damage done by secular communism or just fight over lands or borders or resources. That's secular too. So does it really matter? I mean, would it matter to you at all, what these extraterrestrials are like, or if they have a faith in a higher power or not?
Well, it would be nice. They often talk about, if an extraterrestrial came to the Earth, it's like, who would you send to go be their first point of contact? If you can get past the military shooting them out of the sky, if we can get past that point and they land, there would be this whole power grab where, the politicians would all want to be in there first and want to do all of this stuff. And I'm like, if I had to pick that first contact person, I'd want to pick somebody like the Dalai Lama, someone who's just really smart, but mellow.
Right. Yes, not an instigator. Right. Not excitable.
But maybe he knows Kung Fu because he is Tibetan, and he could if he needs it.
There are Kung Fu Buddhist monks, or not martial artist Buddhist monks out there. That is a real thing. Rita, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. For everybody listening, please go check out Rita's website, soulhealer.com. She has so many interesting books and fields of study that she has covered. Rita, be well.
Thanks, Alan. I will talk to you next time.
All right. That's Dr. Rita Louise. Coming up in the next hour is Marc D'Antonio. And we're going to be talking about Perseverance, Mars, and the search for extraterrestrial life. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio, Sundays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will see you on the flip side.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your most grateful host on KGRA Radio, live Sundays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I love chatting with Dr. Rita Louise. She's just a blast, and she's a good person, great personality, and just so much that we can talk about on and off the air. And to continue this fascinating conversation about what is happening out there in the universe is joining me, Marc D'Antonio, astronomer and the host of Sky Tour Radio on KGRA. Hey, Mark.
Hey there. How are you, Alan? Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you, brother, for jumping in. I appreciate it. This is such an important and historic event, I think, of Perseverance landing on Mars. What's your initial summary of what happened here?
Well, first of all, Perseverance used the same landing technique that the Mars Curiosity rover landed with, a technology called the Sky Crane. And basically, you have the rover and the Sky Crane are contained in this aeroshell that's aerodynamic, and so it speeds through the Martian atmosphere. Then the aeroshell, the heat shield falls away, and the aeroshell drops away at some point. And now just the Sky Crane comes out, and that's got rockets on it. And the rover is tucked up underneath this Sky Crane. As it comes down, the rover starts to descend from the Sky Crane on cables. The Sky Crane, that's the image. Yeah, you can actually see the parachute. That's before the aeroshell actually separates. And before that photo shows the actual rover descending as seen from the Sky Crane. And you see those streaks on the ground to the right and to the left of the rover. Those are actually the jet engines on the Sky Crane that are disturbing the Martian soil. So right in here, the Sky Crane's about 6 feet above Mars. And as soon as the cable paid out enough and it landed, the cables were cut, and the Sky Crane, finished with its job, turned and went away and crashed, which was part of the design. Now, the funny thing about this is that this frame you just showed was part of a video, which will be available as soon as tomorrow. And we'll see that video, a high-res video of this whole maneuver where this thing's coming down and landing on the surface of Mars. And then on the rover is a camera looking up, and it's going to see the Sky Crane dropping it down, and then you'll see the Sky Crane detach and fly away. This whole Mars mission, I've been saying, it's a made-for-YouTube Mars mission. Everything they produce is going to be absolutely stunning. Very high resolution.
That's a good way. That's a good way to for YouTube.
Made for YouTube mission. Yep.
What is the most exciting part of this mission for you?
What's that?
What's the most exciting part of this mission?
Oh, they're all exciting, but let me tell you, when you look at the actual rover itself, it has 16 cameras of its own. There's a total of 7 more cameras that were on the lander and the whole system, the Sky Crane, so you could actually watch, the entry, descent, and landing. That's called the EDL phase, and they have cameras to figure out where they had a camera to figure out where the rover was going to navigate to. That is to say, the sky crane holding the rover was going to navigate to make a safe landing on Mars. And it wasn't going to drop it down, for instance, on a boulder. It was going to drop it in a place that was free of that. And as you can see, it worked flawlessly.
Yeah. And that's amazing, Mark. I mean, when SpaceX has been doing their, what is it, the Falcon 9 tests? Or the spaceship, the recent test, but it's a re-landing rocket. I forget the name of the.
No, you had it right. The Falcon 9.
Falcon 9. Okay. So, the landing, that's what I was afraid of, the thrusters failing on this mission. That's what I was most afraid of, because that seems to be technically, it seems the software to navigate triangulation, all those algorithms seem like they're pretty accurate. But it always seems like it's the hardware that's the scariest part of these missions. How long does it take to develop that? I mean, and that seems like such a risk to send all this expensive equipment over there. And it's unlike here on Earth, we can't really test with that gravity, that low gravity they have on Mars.
That's right. And so everything has to be calculated for the lower gravity. Thrusters have to have the right amount of fuel to be able to handle lower gravity. You'll need less fuel, but you still need to get down to the surface safely. From what I know about this and these vehicles, it takes many years to develop them. Now, luckily, the Curiosity rover, which landed in 2012, by the way, had a 90-day, expected shelf life right on the surface of Mars. It's still tooling around to this day with very little wrong with it. Now, you got to imagine that means that this little beastie it's the size of a small car, incidentally, and it was delivered using the sky crane, just like Perseverance. It's still alive and well. Everything's working. You got to imagine that this is, at the time in 2012, it was the highest level of engineering for a robotic spacecraft in existence. And now Perseverance eclipses it in several ways, not by just the sheer quality of the cameras, but by the data bits that can leave the surface of Mars and get to Earth. That we're actually returning video for the first time from Mars. Think about that. We've never had that before.
And is it going to be live stream, or what do we think?
Well, okay. The problem is that when we talk about returning video, the video always has to come in slower. We can't see it live. We're not going to see it live because it's a data stream that moves at just a few megabits per second. So we're not going to be able to see a live high-res video. So they're going to acquire this data from Mars, assemble it into a video, and then release it. That kind of thing. I'm going to tell you, though, there's two things on this rover that are really astonishing, okay? Now, my camera's here, you're over there, so that's why I keep looking to that side. The two things in this are very, very cool. One of them is that they have a amazing setup on the front of the rover. It's actually right on the front, and it's actually samples of the spacesuit and the helmet, and they're in little tiny round patches. And what happens is there's another unit on top of the robotic arm that's going to look at them from time to time and gauge their longevity, see how they're working. It's going to test to see if the spacesuits we're expecting to use on Mars are going to work, or if they're going to degrade because of the ultraviolet radiation that's coming from the sun. There's nothing to stop it. Pretty much the atmosphere is almost none. Okay. There is some, but it's very, very, very low pressure. It's only 6.5 millibars, for instance, as opposed to our over 1,000 millibars. You can see, even if you don't know what a millibar is, you can see that atmosphere is quite thin. 6 versus over 1,000. Yeah. That's a pretty big difference. So, and they're going to see if the spacesuits can handle it. My prediction is that they probably won't have any problems with these spacesuits. And the other thing that's interesting is that the rover is going to it has on board an experiment called MOXIE, and that's the Mars Oxygen In Situ Explorer. And what this is going to do is it's going to take the carbon dioxide in the Martian atmosphere and convert a few molecules of carbon dioxide to O2. Now, why? That's oxygen. Well, why is that so important? Because we breathe it. And if we're going to go to Mars as a species, we can't bring the oxygen we're going to breathe with us. We have to make it there.
Mm-hmm.
And if Moxie works, game on, man, because that means we're going to end up having the ability to make our own oxygen for both breathing and rocket fuel.
I mean, do we have any idea? Is Moxie a 50-50 shot? Do they have certain expectations of how this thing will function?
Actually, they think it'll work because, here on Earth, we know that if you take carbon dioxide, which is a carbon atom and 2 oxygens, CO2, and you take 2 of those atoms and together, you put them through a reaction, you'll get carbon monoxide off of them, which is C and O, and you can get an O2 out of that. All right. Now that O2 is something that I think is very important, right? That's two atoms of oxygen in a molecule, and that's what we breathe, and that's actually what we use to that's what we breathe, and that's what we use to make rocket fuel. So Moxie is probably going to work. There's no reason why it shouldn't. Mars is 96% carbon dioxide in the atmosphere,
and they also are working on whether they can extract water. Right, because that's the other part of this. So, if both of those things work, then can we say that humans can survive on Mars?
I think it'd be a fair bet that we can. There's plenty of water there. I mean, there's more water on Mars than there is on the moon. Okay, for sure. And you might say, well, that's a silly thing to say because the moon doesn't have any water, but actually it does. And guess where some of that water came from? It came from our own planet. Because it used to circle the Earth a lot closer, and every now and then, molecules of water would actually leave our surface of the Earth and go into space. And guess what? They would land on the moon. And so the moon does have water content based on a borrow of water from the Earth. But it's also got water that was there from primordial origins when it was first made as well. So, but Mars has granite hard ice underneath its mid-latitudes and northern and southern latitudes. And so there's not going to be any shortage of water. In fact, we know liquid water can't exist on Mars because the pressure is so low, the temperature is so low. And there's a whole bunch of science behind that called the triple point of water we could talk about, but we're not gonna. Okay, you don't need to know that. But the thing that's important is under the south pole of Mars, under all that sediment, I forget if it's about a kilometer deep underneath the south pole of Mars, they found liquid water that's there being held as liquid because of the mass and weight of that sediment above it. And that liquid water looks like it's about a 12-kilometer or so long reservoir under that south polar cap. And if that's there, then the possibility that there might be microbial life there exists. We would never have thought that if we didn't find life in another lake that's also deep underneath the surface, and that's Antarctica.
Yep.
You know the lake in Antarctica I'm talking about?
I don't know the name, but I remember this. Yeah,
Lake Vostok. It was a Russian drilling station, Lake Vostok. They drilled down miles below the surface and found the lake. And when they went into the lake that hasn't seen the light of day for a long time, millennia upon millennia, they found over 3,500 different types of microbial life in that lake.
And I know there were concerns about that because if they got released into our modern day era, it could be problematic. That's the fear, right? That these could turn into bugs that could be super bacteria or what have you.
Yeah. They could become the Andromeda strain. Maybe they did get released and that's COVID. I don't know, but I know this. That of course we always have to be careful with that. That's like people that say, let's genetically bring back dinosaurs, let's reconstruct some DNA. The concept of Jurassic Park isn't fully science fiction, all right, for instance. But
Sure.
The fact is, if you did that, what other things are going to come into play as well based on the DNA of the ancient animal? Something could go wrong, something could mutate, and you could have a super bug that could wipe us all out and return the planet to the dinosaurs, for all we know.
Right. I mean, viruses can enter bodies and then mutate in those bodies, right, and jump from species. So if you're bringing back a species that's 60 million years plus old, you don't know how the modern viruses might adapt to those old genetic designs and come out of those bodies like something else. And the same is true when you go to Mars, right? I mean,
exactly right.
we could wreak havoc, or Mars could wreak havoc on us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're so right, Alan. Because the thing is, if we were to, I say contaminate Mars, which we've kind of already done, except that our vehicles have really been very carefully swept and should have been sterile, especially once exposed to space and the high UV ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Any bugs that were on the vehicle were probably destroyed, those that could be seen by the sun anyway.
Yeah.
But the vehicle was pretty sterile anyway once it got into the launch pad and so forth. But the possibility is that naturally it wasn't hermetically sealed. So the chances are that we brought something up into space. And if anything, we contaminated Mars. But if we ever came back with something from Mars, like a soil sample or whatever, now if there were microbes there, well, yeah, that could end up someday becoming the next superbug. We do have to be really careful because they grew up on that planet with its DNA from that planet, and that can kill us here. We don't know that.
But then again, in a sense, we have been swapping spit with Mars, right? I mean, so isn't it quite possible that our DNA is almost identical, if not identical, if one of the other came first, and we continue to swap over the years, maybe that there wouldn't be problematic. Maybe we would be able to handle those bugs or microbes or what have you. And maybe many of those microbes are the exact same microbes that we have here on Earth. Is that possible?
It's possible, and that would actually be a very important test. Because if we saw that there were microbes on Earth that we saw on Mars or see on Mars, then the connection between Mars and the Earth goes back farther than we think. We do know that there were Martian meteorites found in the Antarctic. Sometimes the Antarctic ice sheet is peppered with rocks from space. They kind of show up pretty well. Once they strike on the Antarctic ice cap, they kind of leave a little. They leave notice. There's a little tiny crater, and/or they're exposed by the sun. They heat warmer than the surrounding ice, so the ice on them will melt away, exposing them over time, even if they're ancient. So it's pretty interesting, So we have to be careful. We have to be careful about what we do on Mars. There's no doubt about it.
Rockstar says in the comments, we will contaminate Mars once we try to terraform. Do you think, in a sense, we are inadvertently terraforming just by being there?
Not on a global scale, and hi, Rock. How you doing? Hi, No Rock. One thing I can tell you is that there is a methodology that NASA has for terraforming without even touching Mars, giving it a thicker atmosphere and so forth. We can do that. And the reason we can do that is because we have a way, although we don't have the technology in place yet, there is a way to give Mars what it needs to terraform. What it needs is a magnetic field. And we know that Mars lost its magnetic field a long time ago. That's the reason why its atmosphere is so thin. That's the reason why the surface is pretty much sterile. Because without a magnetic field, then there's nothing to sheath the planet in a protective layer that will catch energetic particles from the sun and prevent them from damaging the molecules of water, for instance, in the atmosphere. And so a molecule of water will get hit by ultraviolet radiation and split apart into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen will go down and land in the planet and bind with other compounds. The hydrogen will leave the planet and go off the planet. That oxygen, however, will go into the crust of the planet, and it's doing this, of course, on a global scale to this day, because there's still oxygen being made from time to time on Mars. But the oxygen goes into the planet, and it starts binding with iron compounds. And when you do that, well, you get something called rust. Okay, that's Fe2O3, 2 irons and 3 atoms of oxygen. And rust is reddish brown, which incidentally is the color of Mars. So when I say Mars rusted, and that's why it's the color it is, the red planet, well, that's what it is. Okay, the iron compounds on the surface rusted. when all the water, of which there was plenty on Mars, was lost. Much of the water is bound up as ice now, and much of the water was just disassociated and sent away, and much of it was, turned into just oxygen atoms, as I said, to rust Mars.
We know bacteria can survive long periods of time, right? Certain bacteria in space. Interstellar travel might be possible for bacteria. Do you think that Mars and Earth was seeded from somewhere else, or do you think life really just started in this solar system?
I think I wrote a book called The Populated Universe, and the populated universe basically posits that life in the universe is the rule, not the exception. And I base that on many observations of life here on Earth and how we developed here. This planet is not the best, and I'll get to the seeding question in a minute. This planet is not the best for habitability of a species like ours. It really is tough on us. We exist here in spite of the Earth, not because the Earth is just so wonderful for humans. It's really not. If you go out too much in the sun, you'll get skin cancer. The UV gets through our atmosphere to some extent and can kill you. We have earthquakes, tornadoes. We have tsunamis. We have disease and so forth. We're fighting one big one now worldwide, and we fought one in 1918, and it went on and on and on for many years and centuries before that. The point being, we're not super habitable, but we're habitable, right? Now, the question is, was life seeded here, from the cosmos somehow? I can't say it wasn't, What's my personal feeling? My personal feeling is that if that happened, it would have had to have happened way back when we were literally still pond scum. Okay, reminds you of that.
Long time ago. Sure.
Yes. Reminds me of that Star Trek The Next Generation episode with John Delancey as Q. And he takes Picard back in time, and they look at a little puddle of ooze, and he says, "You see that goo, Picard? That goo is you." And that was really funny.
Really the best of Star Trek, wasn't it?
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's great.
And I love this, the series finale. That it was just brilliant. And one of the speaking of weather and anomalies, and on Mars, we're going to have this rotocopter, and that I think is very exciting. But do you understand how this will function? Because how will it be protected from windstorms, sandstorms, and what have you?
Well, the most wind that's going to be produced on Mars is probably going to come from this helicopter itself. I'll tell you why. You see those rotors? They have a real steep pitch. They're cupping a lot of air and catching a lot of air. Mm-hmm. The payload of this thing is only the size of a softball, and the whole thing weighs 4 pounds. Okay, this is a really lightweight helicopter. Those little tiny lightweight legs. And it has 2 cameras on it, too. It's going to have a downward-looking camera for navigation, and then it's going to have a wide-angle camera in addition that's going to see the horizon on down and be able to be for the high-res photos that it's going to take and video, actually. Now, this rotocopter, this helicopter, it's Perseverance drone. The Perseverance rover has a drone of its own, and I think that's pretty cool. Now, the rover is not going to, in particular, fly the drone. The drone's going to fly itself. But then again, most drones today fly themselves. So it'll be kind of interesting to see Perseverance from 25, 30 feet up, and 50 feet away. But this helicopter has now 4-foot-long wings. Each rotor is 4 feet long. And it's massive. And it's going to spin at 10 times the speed of a normal helicopter. That's 2,400 revolutions per minute it's going to go. Okay? And the reason it's going to go that fast is because the air is so much thinner. But you know something? I heard that when I saw it fly in the evacuation chamber, the vacuum chamber at JPL, I wasn't there, okay? But I saw a video of it flying. It's loud. You can hear it very clearly. And what you're hearing is the wings, the rotors, chopping at the air. And it's really loud. So I think the microphones on the Perseverance rover are definitely going to pick this thing up, and you're going to hear the sounds of Mars and the sounds of a human helicopter on Mars.
It's amazing. And being such a light and fragile thing, do you think it'll last very long?
Well, in that photo you saw there's a solar panel on top to trickle charge its little batteries, and that's going to be important. But the fact is, if it flips over, it's gone. It's not going to be able to right itself unless they do some kind of weird, run the rotors and flip, and by magic it flips back upright. But it's going to be able to use similar technology that the Sky Crane used to put the rover in the right place without landing it on a boulder. So
Sure.
It's going to have some intelligence to know where to come down, and it's going to be able to make short hops. It's not going to be able to go flying away for like 3 hours at a time. It's only going to be able to fly for a few seconds at a time, a few tenths of seconds at the most, maybe, because in a 4-pound package, all of the energy of the battery is going into flight almost, and very little is going into the cameras, relatively speaking. Most of that energy is going into the rotors and spinning those rotors, and it's spinning 2 sets.
Even with short flights, I guess it will be able to help navigate the rover, right? Because before, if there was something of interest, but it wasn't a part of the original plan, they had to rethink their entire mission, right? Like, okay, do we veer off and go to this direction and check out this really cool rock in the distance, or do we just keep staying on track? And now with this helicopter, basically drone, whatever you want to call it, will they be able to make quicker decisions and more efficient decisions about what to veer off track and check out as they go along?
Yeah, I mean, as Earth gets farther away from Mars, the round trip time to find out if your messages were undertaken properly or not increases as well. So when the rover landed, it was 11 minutes. Well, that's going to increase slowly and be over 20 minutes, at times each way. So you're going to tell the rover, you're going to tell the drone, I want you to fly for 10 seconds and do a terrain relative navigation so that you can then land in a safe zone. Let's just say that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
You give that order at 9 o'clock in the morning. By 9:22, say, the rover will receive it, relay it to the helicopter. The helicopter will start it, and you won't know if it happened until 9:44. And by that time, it's already landed again. So, and then that landing is going to take another 22 minutes for you to hear about that too. So you see, everything moves at the absolutely blinding speed of slow.
Yeah. Well, at the speed of light, but yeah, but slow.
When it comes to that distance, yes.
Exactly, yeah. Will it help us identify water that the rover can go and investigate? Will it be able to get high enough, take a look around, and say, "Ooh, that looks interesting. Maybe that's evidence of water having come up to the surface as the surface temperature warmed or something like that."
There's a slight chance that's possible, but I don't think the rover is going to go high enough for that. I didn't see any height estimates, but I think 20 or 30 feet is the highest that's going to ever go up. But what you said is actually very important because craters are they have walls like this, right? They're curved walls that go down, right, and then the bottom of the crater. Well, this side of the crater right here is this the surface where the rover might be rolling, but deep under the ground here, there might be water that's pressurized into being liquid, and every now and then you see that it bursts through the wall of the crater and goes running down the wall of the crater inside. Yeah. And that rundown we actually see on some of the Mars high-rise images. You can see that this water has burst out and it went down. It sublimated, it went away, and it basically evaporated away because of the low pressure. Because water can't exist as liquid on Mars right now with the low pressure and temperatures as such as they are. So, but, if it sees that kind of thing, if it could see that, oh yes, then it could say, hey, let's investigate that little area, that little gusher that seemed to occur in this crater wall. But that would come later in the mission if the helicopter could still survive that long.
Yeah. What about ice? Because in the moon, right, if we can get into a crater that's shadowed, you could discover ice, right? Yes. Could they do the same thing with this Ingenuity rotocopter? Identify maybe a shadowed crater within a crater, as it were, or a cave. I don't know what the best descriptive for that would be. That you could go and check it out and see, hey, maybe there's ice in there.
Well, that's a I won't say strong possibility, but a pretty good possibility. Anytime you get an aerial view, it's going to help you, a millionfold over the tiny little mast cams, mast cam Zs, which are the main eyes for the high res cameras, are the highest cameras on the rover. But I'll tell you this: we know that Mars is loaded with water. Okay, we know that Mars is loaded with water, and we just don't know exactly where it is. We do know that, for instance, when I think it was the Phoenix lander that landed in the Martian mid-latitudes, it actually landed on the Martian surface, which looked much like this. However, directly beneath the lander, you could see an area that was cleared, and that cleared spot was down to water ice that was beneath the rover. How deep it went, we don't know. It might have gone down 100 miles for all we know, okay, or just 2 inches or an eighth inch for all we know. But there's definitely water ice under the soil in many cases, especially at those northern latitudes and southern latitudes. So finding water, we know, is there. That's why Perseverance landed where it did. That's why Curiosity landed where it did, because we know there are those are locations where water had run off and deposited something. The interesting photo which you showed of the rover's wheel just now, the Perseverance rover, a few minutes ago, actually, that photo shows stone that has a bunch of holes in it, right?
I'm wondering about that. It almost looked like coral, but I'm guessing lava.
I was thinking more like a pumice stone. And the funny thing that's interesting about that is that pumice floats. So perhaps a volcanic eruption had a lot of water content in lava billions of years ago even, all right, and other gases, and that made like a frothy lava that ended up cooling in that frothy type arrangement. And when it happens like that, sometimes that lava floats on water. And on Mars, where the gravity is so much lower, a heavier rock could float easier than on Earth. So that said, I was looking at these rocks right at the base of one of the wheels, okay, in that shot that you had up. And there it is. And right there, right at the front end of the wheel there, you see a rock with holes. And just above to the upper left, you see a rock with holes. Could that be lava rock, pumice, that was floated in on the ancient river and then deposited here as the water receded? It would be the last thing to be left behind once the water receded. So it's possible that that's where this came from. And I would really, really hope, and I'm sure that it wasn't lost on them, that Perseverance will take a look at these rocks here and examine them to see if, in fact, they are like a pumice stone. And if they are, then that's actually a pretty good indicator that they were carried here by water, because this region doesn't have any volcanoes nearby. So they'd have to get here somehow. So the only way would be to be transported by water and float in on a river. That's
fascinating.
Yeah.
What kind of testing should we expect? I know they speak about testing for evidence of life. What's the full gamut of tests that they plan on doing, and what's the most ideal expectation?
Well, there's a number.
We lost Mark for a moment. Somebody working in the secret space program does not want Mark to share their stories. So we'll see, Bill, if you can try to get Mark back on. We'll continue the show. Wow, first it was me, then it's Mark. Perhaps someone is trying to send us a message, though I jest. But I know these images came in here, which were interesting. And they look computer generated to me, but apparently these are first run images of. I don't think so. This looks computer generated to me, but maybe we'll check with Mark when he gets back. As I was saying before, I read Extraterrestrial, the book by Avi Loeb, which has to be one of the best science-based books that I have ever read, hands down. His ability to express science and physics and astronomy for the casual reader or science fan like myself is absolutely brilliant. And Carol Carl, who's been on the show and has her own show up Behind the Obsidian Curtain on KGRA, her and I on many occasions have talked about the Oumuamua apparent asteroid, and it appears that the evidence is very strong that this was a very thin light sail object in our solar system, and that in all likelihood it was interstellar. And so it was either placed on a track, on a course towards our solar system, or it is random. And if it's random, then that implies, if we go with the theory that this is extraterrestrial, it implies that there are a multitude in the trillions and trillions of these objects in order for statistically one of them to just float by into our solar system. If not, that means it was directed. That means some civilization very far away directed this, what he believes to be a light sail, towards our solar system. And even if the light sail gets near the speed of light, if they're shooting lasers at it to as an accelerant, we're talking about, it could be 30 plus year 100 plus years. These are people that are thinking long term, and it just means that they're curious minds, just like our Voyager 1 and 2 going out to the outer reaches of the solar system, and they just want others to know that they're there. And perhaps it will collect data and return to that solar system. And as I'm waiting for Mark to return, I don't know if Bill is able to get him back. I want to explain to you briefly why I encourage you to go out and buy this book, or purchase or read this book by Avi Loeb. He really lays out the evidence that the Oumuamua 2018 comet, as it was entering our atmosphere, it deviated from its course. And the only explanation scientists could come up with was that it was either the photons from the sunlight, pushing this object and veering it off course, which is apparently impossible, because if it is in fact an asteroid, and asteroids, even if it was an oddly shaped, statistically low shaped asteroid, that sunlight alone wouldn't be enough to push it. Only some kind of craft, like a light sail, would be able to be pushed by the sunlight and change its trajectory so that it would deviate. So what are the odds of that, right? The other thing is, well, then it has to be a comet, and off-gassing would have to occur in order for it to change its trajectory. Well, there's zero evidence that there is any off-gassing, that there's any heating of ice and materials on this asteroid that would work as a propellant to change its course. So there's literally no evidence to support that it's natural. And then, in fact, everything is pure speculation about Oumuamua from the scientists. And the best way that Avi Loeb describes it in the book is that scientists have to, as I think he said, bend over backwards to explain it as a natural occurrence. Now, this is Avi Loeb, Harvard professor, astrophysics. He started the Black Hole Initiative, which was the same initiative that eventually captured the first image of a black hole in 2019. And he started the Light Sail Initiative, which was, as I was speaking, us putting probes out, little tiny light sails that you would shoot lasers at and accelerate through the universe. This is a legitimate scientist. I mean, he was hanging out with the likes and having conversation with Stephen Hawking and so forth. So I think that this might very well have been the greatest discovery outside of the crash in Roswell of extraterrestrial life, because there are pictures, not pictures, but there are measurements, data from satellites picking up this object passing through. So we have something measurable to support this as an extraterrestrial object. And I really would like to see the media do more to cover that subject. hopefully the narrative will continue to move forward as people become a little bit more accepting of all things extraterrestrial. Whether it's the fact that our Navy has new protocol to study UAPs, or whether it's, Harvard professors that are more open and accepting about the potentiality of extraterrestrial life and different approaches and how to do that. And I know you've probably heard me bemoan someone who I love very much, Neil deGrasse Tyson, but I bemoaned, that sort of snickering attitude towards, well, we don't really know. And Avi Loeb makes the argument that that's not the right attitude. The right attitude is curiosity. And are we asking as many possible questions as we can? Are we entertaining the idea that extraterrestrial life does exist? And if it does exist, which all evidence seems to suggest more and more so that it does, somewhere in some form, it completely changes our self-awareness and our place on this planet and in the universe. And philosophically, will be extraordinarily exciting. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of his dissertation, as it were, and I think hope, is that it would actually propel us to sort of evolve as a species, which I thought was a really interesting concept. So, Mark, do you think that if we discover extraterrestrial life, or if we prove that we've been visited without a shadow of a doubt, and everyone can agree upon that, do you think that will help us evolve as a species in some way?
I think it's inevitable that we're going to find life out there. And I think it's inevitable that we have to come to grips with who we are and who we have been here. And so, yes, it's going to cause all of us to have a huge, culture shock. Mm-hmm. And we are going to find ourselves wondering just how important we really are on the galactic scale. And the answer is probably not very. And there's going to be a lot of people who can't handle that. They want to be, the be-all, end-all to everything, but they're not going to be. We are not number one. We're just one of many. And that's something that I think is going to really affect a lot of people negatively. For me, hey, man, bring on the Federation. I love it. I'm all for that, I really am.
Did you fall into a time slip just a moment ago, Mark?
I did actually. I don't know what happened, but I was trying very hard to get back in, and I found the little spinny wheel, and it wouldn't go away. And I was like watching it, and I was becoming mesmerized, and I started staring at it. Finally, I thought, I'm being propelled back in time. This isn't good, So I had to figure something out here. So I figured out a way back in. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Bill and Mark, for getting back in here. The gatekeepers were playing games with you, Mark. If you could win a lottery and actually go to Mars, let's say SpaceX does a lottery and it's totally random, and you happen to win the lottery, would you go?
Absolutely not.
And why is that?
No way. Because we're not designed to live on Mars yet. We're not at a point where we have livable space, livable habitats on Mars. I would only be a visitor and without a guarantee of getting back, because you don't travel 10 months, say, in space to go to a planet that you may not land successfully on. And let's say you do, you can't stay there for very long unless you have a moxie, like on Perseverance, that makes your oxygen for you. Yeah. And you have a way to extract water from the soil where it's bound up, for instance. All of those techniques have to be really, really tried and true. And
okay, so let's just say hypothetically all those techniques did work, that you could, like in the movie The Martian, grow potatoes or whatever inside your dome, and you have a means of producing oxygen. You still wouldn't do it?
No, I like it too much on Earth, to be honest. I don't mind. Yeah. I'd love to go places, but you know what? I'll go if I can be transported there. Okay. If that ever comes to fruition, then I'll go. But I'm not going to sit in the spacecraft for 10 months, okay, to be cooped up on a planet I can't walk out and breathe fresh air in for 10 months, okay, and then come back home for 10 months.
Yes. Well, I think after our COVID experience, I think a lot of us can sympathize with that, right?
Yeah. Biosphere 2 failed. Okay, when they tried Biosphere, they tried to put people in a habitat where they would work together and try to get along. It worked for a while, and that's our history. It works for a while, but not forever. And we have to get past that. Now, I say we, that's collective, because we want to make sure collectively that we can survive on another planet and be as comfortable as we can be and have things we can do.
Mm-hmm.
But if I went to Mars, I can't go look on the web for information anywhere. Well, I could. I mean, I could use the Earth web through a special portal, but it would take anywhere from 11 minutes to 20 minutes to get information back one way. My gosh, can you imagine an email? What if you sent a typo?
Well,
I don't know. It'll be a 40-minute time round trip on the long run for the longer times to find out whether you did something right. And they write back saying, "What? Oh, I got to write it all over again." I'm not going to explain.
Protocol in place for that, right? Like back in the day when you wrote a letter, you wrote a long letter and you expected to not get an answer, but when you got an answer, it was a long letter in return.
Yeah.
But okay, do you think that humans can survive colonizing Mars then? I mean, if in like in Elon Musk's proposal, he continues to add pods, continues to add technology and people along and literally build a city. Do you still think it's impossible for us to psychologically sustain ourselves?
No, I don't though, Alan. Because here's the thing. It really comes down to we're social animals. We're gregarious.
Mm-hmm.
We need feedback from other living things.
Not just humans.
Right. Okay. And, you could have 400 people on Mars with you, and you'll know all 400. You'll know all their life stories in the first month, because you're just going to want to know, and you're going to ask, and then you're going to say, yeah, I've heard that before. Yeah, I've heard that before. Thanks, Tom. I heard that before. Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Hey, yeah. You're going to hear everybody's story. You're going to know all their things they like and don't like. I know. Hey, yeah, Fred doesn't like broccoli. I know. We've heard it a million times. Right?
Yeah.
So the bottom line is we need variation. We need new and all that.
Sounds like an office job, Mark.
Well, I worked in a computer science field for many years, and if I didn't see variation, I got bored.
Yeah.
I got bored. I couldn't deal with it. And I left it to do my own thing because I just couldn't deal with it anymore. No way.
Well, even in cities where there are areas that are populated with trees versus areas that have like virtually no trees, the general populace has less depression, has a better state of mind, a sense of well-being. There's something just inherent about nature. So then the next question is, can we take nature with us? Can we make it grow there somehow?
You know what people are going to do? They'll have habitats on Mars, and because they'll be oxygenated habitats, they'll take seeds and they'll grow little plants. They'll grow flowers. Oh, look at my iris. Oh, wow, I made that. And they'll take care of that plant in ways far beyond what they would have done back on Earth. But that plant is the only connection they're going to have, for instance, to Earth. And that's going to be their baby. They'll treat it better than they treat other people, And because they're going to miss the touch, the smells of Earth. They'll smell that rose and they'll say, wow, I remember that smell.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's also that ethical, challenge, which is, do you procreate? Do you have children on Mars? Because if there's ever a scientific experiment on human beings, that would be it.
You gotta get more of us.
Yeah, but we have no idea what that would be like, how those babies would turn out. There could be mutations. It's highly risky in my opinion. And so do you go send people who are not going to procreate for a time that perhaps they give up their ability to or something?
Oh, that's a tough question, man. You're already making it easier for me to answer that question. Yeah, I'm not going to go.
Yeah,
I'll stay here. Thank you. No, the thing is, actually,
human touch is extraordinarily important. I mean, so if you're going to live a lifetime somewhere, I mean, to tell people that they can't procreate, that's rough. Because you're going against instinct, even if they think that they can survive that.
Yeah, but keep in mind that in a habitat like that on Mars, every head is an oxygen consumer. Every head is a food consumer. Those things are going to be very important, and I think it's really important too to keep in mind that babies born on Mars are going to be born into a much lower gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, not as low as the moon, but they're going to be born into a gravity that's way less than half of Earth's. So what's that going to do? How are they going to develop in their muscles? Are they going to be born as little? They'll be born normal, as you expect people to be born.
I think so.
There might be some issues with organs and so forth like that. There might be issues chemically in a baby's body where gravity has, adapted to, our bodies have adapted to the gravity on Earth. When astronauts go to space now, they find when they're on the ISS, the International Space Station, of course, that they bloat because their heart is used to pumping up from the legs and it makes sure that the blood travels to the brain, right? Because it's fighting gravity. It's a disproportionate pump.
Sure. Yep.
But in space, it's not. So they're bloated in space a little bit more than on Earth, right? Well, on Mars, it'll happen too. So kids born there are going to just automatically be over time a little bit more pudgy potentially, maybe, and I just think that's a fascinating concept. What happens? You don't go out and play baseball, so what are they going to do for exercise? Well, they'll have to use gyms, and it'll be mandatory. They'll have to use there'll be mandatory exercise, just like the astronauts on the ISS. You have to exercise. You must, or you'll atrophy. You'll become wasted.
Well,
Zero G.
In order to make something mandatory, you would have to be a part of a company or working a job for a government. If you set up a colony under the name of a country or whatever, if you're kind of oppressing people's freedom, possibly, right? I mean, that could potentially be a problem. And I think of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie,
Total Recall.
Total Recall, yeah.
I know that movie is a good movie.
It's really dated, but I do enjoy it, especially for its time period. It was asking questions that others weren't, and I loved it. And it has a nice little twist at the end as well. But I imagine there's going to be problems on a colony like that. And in response to old dude who I saw in the comments, no, I'm not volunteering to go to Mars. I'm just wondering if Mark is brave enough to do it himself.
I guess you have to call me not a coward, but okay, you can label me a coward. I just don't want to go to Mars. There's nothing there for us yet.
Yeah, and it's not about bravery. It's about practicality, and I think there's ethical questions and so many challenges. But it seems to me we're going there no matter what. So these things are going to happen within the next 10 years, right?
Yeah, and there's people that are really, maybe not 10 years, but Elon Musk would like to be there by 2030 for sure. But, something I think it's going to be a little longer than that because, there's a lot of people that say, yep, I'll go to Mars right now. Those are the Mars yahoos. I mean, that's okay. And these are astronauts talking too. But I have a feeling that when it comes down to that, as you said, the practical aspects of survival on Mars, I think you're going to want to know if your oxygen generators are going to work. I think you're going to want to know that you can get water every time you need to take a shower or water some plants because you will make greenhouses. You will have daily chores to do, and you're going to be doing it at literally less than half of the gravity on Earth. So getting places on Mars, you're going to tend to fall. You can't just wear weighted shoes and think that's going to do it. You're going to have to learn how to deal with that gravity. That's going to take probably a couple months to get used to that alone.
Okay, last question, and then I'll leave you alone with this. Now, if you had a regularly scheduled return trip, like a vacation to Earth, and you could go back to Earth for a few months and then come back for however many years, would that be enough? Would that be enough of a deal breaker?
It might be.
Okay.
Yeah, it might be.
Where else in the solar system should we really be looking? And Enceladus, like what's most important to you?
The next to Mars. There's people right now that are listening to the show that are saying, "Go to the moon. It's right nearby."
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the moon has water. The moon doesn't have any way to produce proper habitats, right? But I do think that if we look at the capability of going to the moon versus Mars, the moon can satisfy a lot of resource needs that we have right now, but it can't replace fossil fuels for us. Okay, it's nothing that's going to give us fusion. All right. In fact, the Perseverance rover uses RTGs to power itself, which are radioisotope thermoelectric generators. It's a mouthful, but it's nuclear.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any solar panels like Spirit and Opportunity did. Opportunity died when its panels got covered by a dust storm. That's a flaw, which they knew going in, but that's why it was only designed to last 90 days, not several years like it did. Yeah. So, so there's a lot going on, but I think that these power supplies like that will, these RTGs as they're called, will allow the rovers to continue working for as long as that fuel lasts, and it is finite, on that end anyway. But I think I addressed some of your question there. But
yeah, no, totally. Now, these images that Bill sent me, do you know what these are here? Are these just renderings?
Yeah, actually, I have a Curiosity rover digital model, and this is a rendering I did a little while ago.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah, and that's actually right there. In that image, you can see at the back end, that little thing sticking up at an angle. That's actually the RTG. That's the power source for the rover. Okay, and to the left, you see that mechanical arm. There it is on the left side. No, it's okay. That's good. On the left there, you see the mechanical arm. Okay, and the end of that arm has a turret on it. That rotates, and you get different instruments coming to bear. All right. And that camera sticking up in the middle, that thing sticking up with that white box on top, that's actually the super cam at the top. And right below it, kind of hard to see, are these two little square objects, all right, right below that circular super cam orifice there on that white box at the top. And those are the mast cams that give you the stereo, full color, high res images, So I spent some time putting in all the joints of this rover so we can move stuff around. So I want to be able to show folks what it's actually doing on the surface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any books or anything else in the works right now?
No, I just have the Populated Universe on Amazon. And that's selling pretty well, but it's about exoplanets, and my whole point being that I feel that the universe is a universe full of life, right? So therefore, a populated universe. So it's actually kind of a cool book. It talks about how we find exoplanets and how come Earth is so important to our study of exoplanets.
Yeah.
Now, the other place in the universe I'd go, and I'm sorry, in the solar system I'd go, by the way, just so you know, is Europa. Now, Europa is one of Jupiter's moons. It's just under 2,000 miles in diameter. It's 1,900.
Mark, we're going to have to hold it right there because at the last minute of the show.
Oh, sorry.
But that's great. I'm glad we ended with Europa. And next time you're on, maybe we can talk more about that as well. And to find out more about Mark's own show, SkyTour Radio, you can go to kgradb.com/SkyTour-radio, or just go to the links that I posted in the chat and Facebook. Mark, thanks so much for coming on again. You are a savior, and I love talking with you.
Thanks, man. It was great to be here. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. Please follow me on Twitter at paranormal_now or on Instagram at paranormal now. And as I had mentioned earlier, if you can pop over to my YouTube page, that's youtube.com/paranormalpop. Please like, subscribe, comment, and hit the notification bell as well. I'm trying to build that channel up a little bit more. I have more content that I'm planning on releasing in due time. So thank you for any support you can give me there. I appreciate that. And thanks to Bill Skywatcher, our amazing producer. We couldn't do the show without him every week. And to Eric Brager at KGRA Radio. Next week, Michael Cremo will be joining us. So in a sense, we will be taking this extraterrestrial, ancient civilization, devolution conversation to a whole nother level. So stay tuned next Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. This is Alan B. Smith. Until next time, live in the mystery.